Welcome back to Weddy TV. In this episode, we'll take you out on a great day's diving as well as training. With limited opportunities, I try and turn every dive into a training session. With so many different aspects to spearfishing, there's a lot of stuff that you can work on. On this day, we're spending a bit of time out in deeper water, as we have some fantastic visibility, and with a short period of time, I want to try cycle as many deeper dives as I can. First dive of the day, dropped in on this beautiful area of bommies. This is such a cool spot, sitting right out on the sand and anywhere from sort of 22 to 27 meters. My first dive is just a scoping dive, and then I'm going to make a dive to the bottom. It's a magical day in the water today. With this fantastic visibility, 21-degree water, it doesn't get much better. It's important for me to try and orientate myself on the bottom in a good spot for the fish to approach. With this large area of broken ground, it might take a little bit of trial and error to figure out where that spot is. This sort of country is prime real estate for a lot of the good target species we look for. Once back on the surface, it's time to start my recovery. Focus on composing myself, then back into the hunt to look onto the next spot. I can use my dive watch to monitor my recovery and also my training. So in this case, I've been at 26 meters for about 2 minutes. So I need to at least double that if I can before making my next dive. We nab a couple of these kohiru to see if we can drum up some excitement. It didn't take long for a bronze whaler to turn up in the Burley Trail, and nothing really else of interest. I had already made a few dives around, seeing if I could find any boarfish, John Dory, or maybe some tarakihi, but no luck. After a while of not seeing any particularly good fish, I changed tack to start looking in the holes amongst these bommies. It's not always just to look for crayfish, you actually find some really interesting species sometimes, especially in these big rocks when you're out in deeper water. These holes, for example, are full of slender roughy. Very common when you sort of get into deeper water. This also adds a nice dynamic to your spearfishing and training. Spending time looking in holes at depth, there's lots of things you can learn just from checking out the structure. There's some really nice holes in here, but I only saw a few small crayfish. After logging a few dives, it was time to move spot.
The first spot is one of my favourite places to dive. Such an awesome big reef system out in sort of 20 to 26, 27 metres. But nothing good today. Saw one bronzy that you would have seen in the footage, and lots and lots of bait, but pretty quiet, but still really nice diving. So we're going to head into the next spot here onto a weed edge, and maybe anywhere from sort of 15 to 30 metres. See if we have a bit more luck here, and keep chipping away.
Working my way along this edge, I come into this broken sort of ground. I really need to take my time on the way down, as there could be any sort of species parked up amongst this kelp in quite a big area. Fortunately, with this really nice visibility, I can see quite a fair way. If I race too quickly to the bottom, I commit to that spot, and if there's a fish away from me, I'll end up spooking it. Like this boarfish. Fortunately, staying higher in the water column, I can slowly glide my way over, staying above the fish not to spook it. Boarfish don't particularly like being swum at on the bottom. Make sure to have a look around on the way back to the surface, so you can pre-plan your next dive. Even on the dives when I don't spearfish, I'm learning different things about the country, about the time of day, what the current might be doing. It all adds to the encyclopedia of knowledge. This is a really cool spot, but it takes me a bit of time to find it. A very low-lying bit of reef out on the sand. I dive down close to the bottom and scan as I swim along. This particular spot is quite hard to pick up with a sounder, as the rocks are very, very low-lying. I use this rock as a reference point whenever I dive the spot, knowing where I am in this sort of garden of reef here. It's amazing the fish life you find once you get to the bottom. As we mentioned earlier, check my watch once I get to the surface to figure out what my surface interval should be. When training like this, I don't want to go too much over double the time. So for that example, just over 2 minutes, I want my surface interval to be around 4 minutes before diving next. But not leave it too long, as I want it to be a little bit strenuous. I make the exact mistake I talked about not doing earlier. I maybe land a little bit too quickly and in the wrong spot, and in turn spook this nice big boarfish. They can camouflage themselves very well to the bottom. Although interesting, not a particularly great sign with this butterfly perch resting, having a sleep next to this tiny rock. Likely due to the real lack of current. So I head in shallow, as I need to try get at least a few fish before heading home. There is plenty of these pori around, and they actually make really nice eating at the right time of year, especially when they're nice and fat. I'm looking for sort of a medium-sized one that's not too big, as they can get a little bit tougher when they're bigger. Pori this size can taste really, really good. It's not always the highest form of efficiency to gather fish in New Zealand, diving in deeper water, but it is necessary if you're wanting to increase your breath hold and also cycle your diving. We have time for one final spot before needing to head home. I use the sounder on the little Staby craft to find the spot sitting right out on the sand. Notice how I point my spear gun out to start with, as this really helps with your orientation to make your dive vertical. Then once getting closer to the bottom, pull my gun in slightly so I'm a bit more maneuverable and adaptable. I make a dive where all the demoiselles are sitting up in the water column. There's a lot of directions that the fish could come at me from. And unfortunately in this scenario, I happen to be facing the wrong way. These two big snapper come rocketing in to check me out, but as I swing my gun to get into position, they spook. These are all great scenarios to learn in the future, so I can try and improve my approach and understand where the fish are likely going to hang out on bits of reef. Straight away I noticed this nice boarfish parked up between two rocks. I'm not going to make the same mistake I did earlier. I stay high in the water column just to analyse the situation and get on top of the fish. Most fish, their eyes are on the side of their head, so approaching them from above can be a great way to get close. I orientate myself so I can allow in case this fish spooks. In between dives, this nice kingfish comes in, high up in the water column, and Sophie makes a quick dive. She makes a good calm approach, but unfortunately the kingfish is a little too spooky. There was a real lack of current and tide on this day, which is a real shame, as often these spots are not going to hold a lot of good fish in that scenario. The more current that you get in New Zealand, typically the more fish that you'll find. You can see how stagnant the kelp is on the bottom. It's not a great sign for a lot of the species that we're targeting. The last fish of the day, another small boarfish. It's getting towards the tail end of the season for boarfish as the water begins to cool soon. They've already spawned, and in the next month or two they'll tend to disappear out on the sand again until next summer. Such a beautiful day on the water, as this time of year can be some of the best spearfishing conditions wise. I can use my Mission 2 computer to analyse the stats for the day. I was out diving for about 3.5 hours. During that time I did 45 dives, held my breath for about 67 minutes, and it shows my average and my max depth there.
This time of year where it's nice and clear like that, the water's reasonably warm, I really enjoy going out exploring, looking for rocks, sitting out on the sand, and probably cycling through more deeper dives than you really need to, as there's lots of fish right up in the shallows, but it's good training and good exploring when you can with that visibility. So it's been a great day on the water, and it's time to head home to fillet some boarfish.